Hey there. So the podcast is currently on an extended hiatus so that I can write my next book and work on some other exciting projects. But while we're away, I hope you'll enjoy this fan favorite episode from the archives. If you want brand new content to help you make peace with food and heal from diet culture, come sign up for my free weekly newsletter at christyharrison.com/newsletter, where I answer a weekly listener question. And as always, if you join my Intuitive Eating Fundamentals course at christyharrison.com/course, you get access to our exclusive monthly Q&A podcast where I answer all your new questions. Just go to christyharrison.com/newsletter and christyharrison.com/course to sign up, or click the links in the episode description. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and author of the book Anti-Diet: Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is available wherever books are sold. Join me here every week as I interview interesting people from all different backgrounds about their paths toward peace with food and their bodies. And by the way, on this show, we bleep out diet culture stuff like weight and calorie numbers, but we don't censor swear words or other adult language, so listener discretion is advised.
Anti-diet revolution, we're for health at every size. Eat the foods you like. Food Psych.
Hey there, welcome to episode 193 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with writer and feminist marketing consultant Kelly Diels. We talk about the links between diet culture, patriarchy, and anti-feminist marketing practices, aka what Kelly calls the female lifestyle empowerment brand. We also talk about the role of abundance in healing from diet culture, how to reclaim your life from the life thief, understanding and healing our relationship with money, and so much more. It's a really great episode. I can't wait to share it with you in just a moment. But first, I'll answer this week's listener question, which is from a listener named Andrew, who writes, I'm a new listener, and so trying to understand some of the vocab and concepts in this podcast. I'm a person who pursued intentional, large volume weight loss after living in a larger body for 10 years of my life. Since listening to your podcast, I've been introduced to the term orthorexia, and I feel as though it describes the kind of disordered eating I still suffer from post-weight loss. Here's the thing, though. In one of your podcasts, you cited a broad statistic that of the people who pursue intentional weight loss, something like 90% will gain that weight back, and many will gain back more than they lost. You then said that of the small percentage that do keep the weight off, all are left with some degree of disordered eating. While this is certainly true of me, it's hard for me to understand the body positivity concept of, should I have just found a way to be happier in my larger body before? I was living a very unhealthy lifestyle, which was contributing to weight gain and increased health risks, so I just have a hard time knowing which result is better. And maybe that's not the point, probably neither is better, but a better idea of what body positivity truly means would help me in my recovery. So thanks, Andrew, for that great question. And before I answer, just my usual disclaimer that these answers and this podcast in general are for informational and educational purposes only and aren't a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice. So first of all, I'm sending you tons of compassion because I know how much you must be struggling with this, especially since orthorexia is so rampant and so hard to escape in diet culture in this day and age with the wellness diet as the new modern guise of diet culture. It's really like everywhere you turn, there are triggers. So I can appreciate how challenging it is to recover from orthorexia in an environment like this. And I also went through my own recovery from disordered eating and orthorexia too back in the day. And what you say about the statistics is very true. So at least 90% of diets fail, and there's decades worth of studies finding that it's likely even higher, around 95 to 98% in quite a few studies out there. And by the way, for any science nerds who want to dig into that research, a couple of good references are these papers, but just trigger warning for numbers and weight stigmatizing language in them, including in the title of one of the papers that I'm about to give, which is called Probability of an Obese Person Attaining Normal Body Weight, Cohort Study Using Electronic Health Records, because anorexic. Obviously, the terms quote unquote obese and quote unquote normal weight are pathologizing of larger bodies, right? And the other paper that I would recommend is called Can Anyone Successfully Control Their Weight? Findings of a 3-year community-based study of men and women. There's like tons of other papers too that go back to the 1950s. The first seminal paper that found 98% of diets fail was done in 1959. It was actually a really well-designed study. I bought and downloaded that study to look at for my book. Maybe we'll link to that in the show notes too. It's by Albert Stunkard and Mavis McLaren Hume, but it costs money, and so I'm not going to necessarily recommend that as a resource. There are plenty of other studies you can read for free with a library card or institutional access through a university or a friend who has that institutional access or whatever. So no need to necessarily buy and download a 1959 study unless you're writing a book that is going to use that. Anyway, though, so that is the science on weight regain after intentional weight loss. So getting back to your question, what you said about the people who do maintain intentional weight loss doing it through disordered means, that's true. That minuscule percentage of people who maintain the weight they lost intentionally are engaging in disordered eating behaviors. There's actually a 2017 paper that compares these quote unquote successful weight loss maintainers to people with chronic anorexia nervosa. Although in reality, it's likely that these so-called success stories simply are people with chronic anorexia nervosa or other eating disorders, like you mentioned, Andrew. They just started out in larger bodies. And so they fly under the radar of diagnosis because diet culture praises weight loss in larger bodied people by any means necessary and doesn't necessarily see it as disordered, even though it would diagnose the eating disorder in a smaller bodied person, but miss all the signs and symptoms in a larger bodied person. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And it sounds like, Andrew, that's what's going on for you. That weight loss you're maintaining is coming at the expense of your mental and physical health because it's coming through disordered behaviors, specifically orthorexic behaviors. So if anyone wants to look at that paper, by the way, it's a 2017 paper called Long-Term Weight Loss Maintenance in Obesity, Possible Insights from Anorexia Nervosa. Although, of course, major trigger warning there, because you can tell in the title, there's descriptions of disordered behaviors that frames these behaviors as a good thing, which of course we know they're not. And it's abhorrent that the study authors were able to get away with this. They're all eating disorder researchers. And so there was a lot of flap in the health at every size community about how these researchers could frame anorexia as a potential intervention for people in larger bodies. It's just horrifying. And of course, also trigger warning for numbers and weight stigmatizing language in that study too. But now to your question and comment, the sort of main meat of your question, which is, should I have just found a way to be happier in my larger body? And I was living a very unhealthy lifestyle, which was contributing to weight gain and increased health risks. So in my view, and in the view of the Health at Every Size movement that I'm a part of, the key here is that it's both. You can address both of these things. As in, yes, finding a way to be happier in your larger body is definitely one important path to improved health and well-being. Of course, acknowledging also that health is not a moral obligation and that nobody is required to pursue health in order to be worthy of respect and care and all of that stuff. But, making peace with your body and learning to take care of it in an anti-diet way is an important path to overall well-being at the mental, physical, social, and emotional levels. So truly holistic well-being, not like what gets made out to be holistic in diet culture, which is really just physical. It's just prioritizing the physical. And so Health at Every Size is an anti-diet approach that helps people engage in self-care behaviors, like eating intuitively and moving joyfully, but also so many other things beyond food and movement, like getting effective and non-stigmatizing healthcare that is weight inclusive, that doesn't pathologize you because of your body size, and developing resilience to weight stigma and other forms of oppression to help you navigate the world without experiencing as much harm, and so much more. Health at Every Size really does attend to those holistic aspects of people's health and well-being. And HAES also pushes for change at the societal level so that ultimately people won't have to be so resilient to all the stigma that's out there in the world because it won't be there in the world anymore. That's our goal, right? And obviously it's not necessarily going to happen in our lifetime that all that stigma goes away, but that's what we're working towards. That's what we're pushing for in terms of social change because it is a social justice issue. But also, in terms of your comment, Andrew, that you were engaging in an unhealthy lifestyle, if you weren't taking care of yourself in those ways and all those holistic ways before, like the mental, emotional, social, physical, and having resilience to stigma, being able to take care of your body without dieting, all of that good stuff, if you weren't able to do that, then that might not have been the best thing to support your well-being. Like how you were taking care of yourself or not taking care of yourself could have maybe been tweaked in order to support your well-being, but that doesn't have anything to do with weight itself. And the fact that your body was larger before is really just a red herring that diet culture loves to blame for any health problems that might befall a person in a larger body. Because diet culture takes this association that we see between larger body size and certain health outcomes. And I say certain health outcomes because there are other health outcomes where larger body size is protective, but we do see an association between certain negative health outcomes and larger body size. And so diet culture takes that association and interprets it as causation. Diet culture interprets it as your larger body size causes you to have poor health on various measures. It causes you to have diabetes or it causes you to have heart disease. And we know that just isn't true. I gave a whole presentation and talk about this at FNCI, the National Dietitians Conference in 2018. I've mentioned before that I have my slides available to download if anyone is interested in reading the science. And of course, trigger warning for the references I list there, as well as the slides. There's one little weight number mentioned on one of the slides. And you can download that at christyharrison.com/FNCE 2018, christyharrison.com/FNCE 2018. So diet culture loves to blame body size for health problems, and that just isn't true. It just is not true that larger body size causes health problems because we don't actually know that from the science. The science is not controlling for confounding factors that can easily explain the association between weight and health outcomes, which are weight stigma, weight cycling, physical activity, and disordered eating. All of those things can affect people's well-being, and larger bodied folks have greater risks on all of those measures. So the idea here is that if you can heal from your orthorexia and give up the diet culture behaviors you've been engaging in, your body may get larger again, or it may not, and we can't predict that. We never know what's going to happen to someone's body with improved self-care behaviors. But regardless, in any case, you'll be much better off in terms of your physical and mental well-being than if you were still struggling with orthorexia. Because engaging in disordered eating of any kind, orthorexia, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder not otherwise specified, ARFID, anything you can think of, any kind of disordered eating you can think of. And by the way, this goes for subclinical eating disorders too, like eating disorders that have not been diagnosed, or maybe you're engaging in the behaviors less than the requisite amount of times you're supposed to be engaging in them for a diagnosis. Any type of disordered eating behavior is risky to your health, and you would be better off recovering from the disordered eating all across the board. Doesn't matter what size you are, doesn't matter what eating disorder or disordered eating behaviors you have, that is true. You're better off without engaging in disordered eating. Now, I don't know exactly what behaviors you were engaging in before the disordered eating when you labeled yourself as having a quote unquote unhealthy lifestyle. And it's possible that you were already engaging in some disordered eating behaviors then. They just were not the kind that led to your body shrinking the way that the later disordered eating behaviors did. So as a general statistic, people in larger bodies are more susceptible to disordered eating, at higher risk of disordered eating in this culture that we live in, because this culture stigmatizes larger body size. And so if you were growing up in the world as someone in a larger body, or I don't know what your story is exactly, but you said you spent 10 years in a larger body, that experience is stigmatizing, and that experience probably had some profound effects on your psychological well-being in terms of the stigma that you had to experience moving around in the world in that larger body. And that is not to say that being in a larger body is bad. That's to say that weight stigma is bad. Discrimination based on body size is bad, just like any form of discrimination is. Discrimination based on skin color, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, all of that stuff. And that's what we need to address. We need to stop the discrimination, not stop the identity, not stop people being in larger bodies or people having different skin colors or different sexual orientations or all of it. So I don't know what was going on for you before, but when you say unhealthy lifestyle, It's possible that some of that was being triggered or exacerbated by the weight stigma you were experiencing in the world too. I don't know. I can't say for sure what you were going through, and I can't say for sure what a health at every size approach would tell you to do instead. But just know that in general, for any health condition you're dealing with, you absolutely don't have to lose weight in order to manage it. The concept of quote unquote needing to lose weight in order to deal with a health condition is just diet culture. It's not true. Nobody needs to lose weight. And there are non-weight centric solutions to anything you could need to address with your health. And weight loss as an intervention is not only not effective in the long run, as we talked about earlier with the high rates of weight regain, but also weight loss actively causes harm in the long run. And so basically, weight is not a cause of poor health outcomes. And I think we need to really do a lot of work to unlearn that in our culture, because diet culture creates that connection or creates that belief in all of us from such a young age that we can go around blaming our body size or blaming other people's body size for health outcomes that are happening to them that have nothing at all to do with their weight, or that are likely more accurately explained by weight stigma and weight cycling, which are more likely to happen to people in larger bodies. So I hope that helps answer your question. And to submit a question of your own for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, go to christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions. And then if you want to ask me any question you want and have me answer it much more quickly, you can join my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. The course has a wealth of audio and written content teaching you the principles of intuitive eating, plus an exclusive monthly Q&A podcast where you get to ask your own questions and listen to hundreds of answers I've already given to other participants so that you can work through all the different sticking points in intuitive eating and really put it into practice in your own life. When you join, you also get access to our private Facebook community exclusively for course participants so that you can have real-time guidance from me and my team, as well as hundreds of other people who are alongside you on this intuitive eating path. A participant named Karine recently said, "I enrolled in the Intuitive Eating Fundamentals course and it is fabulous and so helpful. I've been able to stop obsessing about food. The freedom is incredible. I feel such a debt of gratitude to you for what you're doing. I knew I was spending too much time and energy focusing on food and exercise and worrying about my body, but I had no idea how much of my life it was sucking away until I was on the other side. And I can never go back. My life has opened up and I have the headspace to pursue things I never imagined." I love getting feedback like this about the course, and now is a great time to join because I'm getting ready to release a big update to the course materials next month, since now I've been teaching this course for about 3 years. So if you join now, you'll get all of the content that people are already loving, plus free access to all the updates as soon as they're released. If you're ready to break free from diet culture and reclaim the life it stole from you, you can learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by Poshmark, which is one of my favorite apps for anyone who's recovering from diet culture. On Poshmark, you can shop from millions of closets across America, which is a great way to make sure you always have comfortable clothes that fit the body you have now at an affordable price. And Poshmark helps you sell the stuff you don't wear anymore so that you can trade in those triggering clothes in your closet for some cash in your pocket. And who doesn't love that? Download the free Poshmark app today and shop from tons of brands for all ages and genders, with a wide range of plus sizes available too. When you see something you want, make the seller an offer so that you can get the stuff at a price that works for you. And if you're doing one of those much-needed closet cleanouts, listing your items on Poshmark is super easy. Just upload pictures of your stuff to the app, set a price, and then ship it. No more cluttering your closet with stuff you no longer wear. I've really been amazed by some of the awesome plus size and size inclusive brands they have on Poshmark, like Torrid, Eloquii, Premi, Universal Standard, ModCloth, and so many others. I just found a pair of Madewell jeans for only $40 and an amazing ASOS jumpsuit for $30, which is such a steal. And you can get $5 off your first purchase right now just for listening to Food Psych. Download the Poshmark app and enter the invite code FoodPsych when you sign up. That's invite code FoodPsych, FOODPSYCH, for $5 off your first purchase. And now, without any further ado, let's go talk to Kelly Diels. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
So when I think about it, and I think back to my early years, when you're still sort of, your food intake is defined by your parents, it seems like it's a really fraught thing when I think about it. I was a really sensitive eater and a picky eater, and my father really felt affronted by that and would make me sit at the table until I finished every single thing. And so I would find all kinds of inventive ways to get the thing I didn't like off my plate and like hidden somewhere or fed to the dog or even stuffed in a crack in the dining room chair, which was really interesting for my mom when she took the chairs to be reupholstered. She was completely embarrassed. So, I mean, when I think about it, it was like a locus for control. And it was, something I felt very thwarted about, not being able to define what I wanted to eat and being forced to eat things that I found to be like really highly unpleasant. And then, later in my very early teens, like 13, 14 years old, grade 8 and grade 9, I full on had an eating disorder and nobody knew it. And I was not eating and fainting in the bathroom like once or twice a week and going to the doctor and because I'm fainting and everyone's wondering why I'm fainting and just lying to the doctor and telling him, yeah, of course I eat.
Wow. And the fact that he at least asked the question is probably a rarity. I think a lot of doctors don't even ask about that stuff. But how did the eating disorder sort of take hold? What do you think triggered it?
I actually think it was trying to navigate the transition from child to woman and really having it in my head, like what does it take to be a successful, pretty, popular teenage girl or young woman? And thinking that it was really important that I be very thin.
Wow. Where do you think that idea came from?
Mostly. It's the water we swim in.
Right.
That's just cultural programming.
Yeah, I know. I always try to not lead the question, but it really is everywhere. It's hard not to absorb those messages.
Yeah. And when I think about it, I remember in grade 7, that's the year before I went to high school, thinking about, okay, I'm 12 turning 13. This is like an important milestone and I'm going to have to change. I'm going to have to be nicer. I'm going to have to be sweet. I'm going to have to be pretty. Like I literally thought that and made like an explicit decision to okay, I'm going to stop being so rowdy and mouthy and all those things. And I made that decision. And I really think the not eating was tied to that as well. It's like, okay, well, this is what I have to be in order to grow up and be a woman.
Oh, God. It's so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Did you see women in your life doing that too? Was there dieting in your family or?
Oh, yeah. I never saw a woman in my life who wasn't dieting ever.
Wow. So they were all really steeped in diet culture.
Yeah. It's only recently that I realized that you don't have to be steeped in that. Again, it's the air that we breathe. I would be astonished if I met someone who wasn't steeped in it.
Right. And that you can opt out and not diet, choose not to diet is such a foreign concept to so many people, including so many folks probably, there's quite a handful of new people listening to every episode. And, I'm sure if you're just coming in new to this, you're like, wait, what? It is sort of mind-blowing to think that there's another way.
Right. And there's freedom on the other side of that. I guess that's one of the things I want to stress is when you put down this tool of self-abuse, you actually start being more of yourself. It's just unbelievable.
And it's interesting that it sounds like when you were growing up, you maybe got it from somewhere, got told from somebody that you were too rowdy or too mouthy, or, that was a judgment that was made on you. But it sounds like that's really more of who you were. You were an outspoken person and you are an outspoken person now, you came back home to yourself maybe.
Yeah. That's definitely true. And I think that I always stuck out because of that. And plus I was a really smart kid. And I think that I just didn't fit in the box of what people around me thought a proper girl and a proper young woman was. And I was acutely conscious of it, and I tried to sand down my edges, but my edges are where I shine.
Yeah, that's what makes you unique.
Right.
I feel that too. I feel that very hard. I actually was called literally mouthy by a first grade teacher who I told my parents that she said that and they were like, that's such an old fashioned word. Why is she using that word? What a weird thing to say, Oh,
I think everybody in my family called me mouthy. Mouthy, talks back, all the things.
Yeah. When you started having the eating disorder then and having the complications from it. What was that like as a, formerly mouthy girl to sort of go into your shell like that?
I mean, that's exactly what it is. I don't think I have ever felt so insecure and so conscious of like what everyone was thinking about me all the time. Like it was to the point that I would use a different entrance at school. Like I lived across the street from the school and I would walk around the school rather than just cross the street and go in the front entrance because there would be like a crowd of people standing outside and I didn't want to walk past a crowd of people. Like I was so acutely conscious of everything, so self-conscious. And like there is a link between losing your voice and feeling like you're not allowed to take up space in the world and diet culture. Like the two things totally go together.
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting, too, how diet culture tells us that the key to all the things we want, the key to acceptance, love, friendship, romance, is to shrink your body and to be this cultural ideal of thinness. But actually, as you experienced and as so many of us experienced, I'm sure listening, and I did too, like that promise never gets delivered. That promise is actually the exact opposite of what happens for so many of us.
Yeah. And for me, it was like really, really connected to this notion of like being the good girl, like being excellent, being a good girl. And when I look back at it, when I wasn't eating, like I was pounds at, like I was tiny and I just I couldn't see it. And it's just, I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to say. Like the notion of being a good girl in a way doesn't have anything to do with size. It has everything to do with that women are not actually okay as we are, that we are inherently defective. Like there's this cultural notion that says just by virtue of being a woman, there's something wrong with you and you've got to correct it. And your entire life is about correcting it. And when the entire world is built for the male body, any signs of like femininity are going to be a problem. So it's the female body that's the problem. It's not necessarily even about size.
Yeah. And I think that's why so many people why adolescence is such a hard time and a high risk time for eating disorders, because people are growing into their body. And of course, there's like the complications of gender and sort of whether you identify with the gender you were assigned or the sex assigned at birth or not. And that can really come out at adolescence too. But like, especially for those of us like assigned female at birth and growing into female bodies and sort of feeling like, okay, I'm a girl becoming a woman, that is an incredibly fraught time. And the idea of just like having curves or having a period or any of the stuff that sort of marks you as a woman is so loaded with shame. So just there's so much baggage on it.
Well, and I see something happening too that helps me reflect on this. So I have a 12-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old daughter. And they've grown up in a house where their mother, me, has sort of liberated herself from diet culture, and I've really worked hard to like get free of those jaws. And so they're growing up in a household where there isn't that locus of control around food, where there isn't a pressure to be a thing, and where I'm constantly like processing with them, like what it means to be a young girl and a woman in our culture. And like they have never dieted. They don't feel any pressure to diet. And I just feel like I've created this refuge in my house from like our wider culture where like this is not normal and this is not okay. And your body is okay and your body is great and you're wonderful. And they're like enormously powerful, articulate people who stand up for other people, who speak truth, who can't be controlled or coerced. And I see the relationship between that. Like when we create this space where we denormalize diet culture, where we say, actually, there's something wrong here, we create the space for women to be powerful and advocate for themselves and for other people.
God, that is so amazing. That I want like all the parenting tips from you for future reference, because what a feat, to accomplish in our culture, right? It sounds like it probably took a lot of constant discussion and unpacking and sort of every day, like little moments, I'm sure, that come up around your kids seeing diet culture or trying to put that on them and having to help them navigate it.
Yeah, I'm just constantly pushing back on it.
And probably now they too have the language to do that themselves as well.
They do. They do. And I mean, I also have to credit the internet. Like they watch a lot of young adults, YouTubers and bloggers who have these systemic analysis that really does equip a young person to distance themselves from the things that we're otherwise supposed to marinate in.
Yeah, I think that's a great age too to start introducing the systemic analysis, because as I've spoken with some other like psychologists and stuff on the podcast about, that adolescent time is like really a time when kids are naturally starting to be drawn to rebel, and not necessarily knowing what they're rebelling against, but just feeling like something's not right in the world, like the rules, I don't want these rules to be hemming me in, and like starting to challenge authority. And so giving them that systemic analysis then and sort of saying like, you're right, like you're right to have this rebellious energy and to feel like there's something off in the world. And here's, a way to understand that. Here's a framework for it. And maybe here's what to do about it is like incredibly powerful at that age.
Yeah. And I mean, part of it too is that it's not even that I like woke up and they were 11 and I needed to like introduce something to me. It's just how they grew up. Like that has become the air that they breathe. So I'm not even sure it was like an explicit parenting strategy where I thought of like, what are my parenting tools? And it's just like, this is who I am, and liberation is contagious.
Yeah, that is so true. Well, so I'm so curious, like how you got to that place from being that 13-year-old or whatever who was in that anorexia place and trying to shrink yourself to fit. Like how did that start to tip, or how did that evolve from there, I guess?
I mean, it's evolved across time. And I would say in my 20s, I wasn't struggling with anorexia. I was struggling with bulimia and doing a lot of binging. So it sort of morphed. But honestly, it wasn't until my mid 30s where I had an epiphany that it didn't have to be this way. Like it literally had never occurred to me that I didn't have to be on a diet and I didn't have to be smaller. And of course, being on a diet for 25 years, what it did was completely add weight to me. Like that's what we know weight cycling does. So like, I'm like, anyways, but it was not until I was like 35, 36 years old when I started reading Kate Harding's Shapely Prose. And I don't even know how I found it, but it was just literally like, oh my God, right? Like, oh my God, there's a thing called diet culture. It's misogynist, it's anti-feminist, fat is a feminist issue. And like, it doesn't have to be this way. I can actually accept myself as I am, which I really struggled with. Like, it wasn't like I immediately, accepted my body. I intellectually was really emboldened by all of these things and still absolutely dieting for the next couple of years. But once I really internalized the framework, like really in my bones, and started understanding it, and I read Health at Every Size by Linda Bacon, started following like Marianne Kirby, who is Kate Harding's co-writer with Lessons from the Fatosphere. And, just all the fat acceptance bloggers, like I have to say thank you to them. They literally changed my life and like got me free. It took time, but it changed everything. And all of the self-doubt that I had been carrying around for 25 years, thinking about, okay, I'll do that when I lose the weight, or, I'll go apply for the job or get successful or write the book or do the thing or get on stage after I lose the weight, that just, it went away. And suddenly I could actually just start doing the things that I wanted to do. And so getting free of diet culture and coming into a place of fat acceptance allowed me to be who I always was, to be this smart, sassy person who had something to say and something to contribute. And I just started working on my career instead of like working on being thinner.
Oh, that's so good. I love that too. And it really captures how much diet culture steals from us and how much we can reclaim when we just like let that shit go.
Seriously. It's unbelievable. And like the less I think about diet culture and the less I allow it to run me, the more money I make, the better work I produce, the more people I'm able to influence. Like there's a direct relationship. And so if we look at it like if we zoom up a level, diet culture steals power from women.
That's so well said. And it does, because it, as you said, I loved your recent interview with Virgie Tovar in Forbes, where you talked about like how being fat has affected your career and that it makes it, we have this research showing that people in larger bodies make less than people in smaller bodies, and that diet culture really does affect how people show up in the workplace. But a part of that, like as you said, is a large part of that is systemic fat phobia, but also a part of that is how we as individuals show up in our careers and in our work, and like how diet culture makes us feel like, whatever our size, but especially true, I think, as you go up the weight spectrum, feeling like we have to put our lives on hold, put our careers on hold, not show up and be visible, as you said, in our careers until we are quote unquote acceptably small.
Right. So here's the thing that I have just come to realize over the last several years is that, yes, there's systemic fat phobia, and it has absolutely impacted my career, and it's impacted my own confidence. And it's kept me off of stages, literally kept me off of stages, because I thought, oh my goodness, I can't take that speaking engagement until I lose weight. I don't have time to lose weight for that event, like just ridiculous things. But now I realize that there are things I see in the world and things that I know in the world that I know them because of my experience navigating fat phobia. And so there's a way in which it's an asset. So I am able to see things that other people don't see. So having me at the table helps bring a perspective and helps us see around a corner and see things. So like I'm a creative asset because of my experience in the world, which is not to say, like, let's not worry about discrimination because it produces creative people. No, like there are other ways to become creative that are significantly less traumatic. But in this moment in time, because I'm a creative and that's what I do, I create, having this experience in the world and seeing the world from a different lens, like that's what artists do. So this is a creative asset. And when I carry that around and remind myself of that in moments when I feel like I'm the odd one out, or that people might be looking at me or what have you, like in those moments where my insecurity shows up, rightfully so, I can remind myself like, I have something to contribute. I see the world in a way that no one else at this table sees, and I need to bring this to the table because we're going to make something amazing because of that.
Oh, that is so helpful. I think that's really great for anyone listening to hear who's in that place of like starting to recognize systemic fat phobia, starting to recognize the ways that diet culture has hindered their lives. And, like you said, maybe they're still in the place of like, they're still dieting, but they're learning about these systemic issues. One thing that I definitely hear from people is like, well, it feels so hopeless, or it feels so like diet culture is such a huge behemoth. Like, how can I possibly go up against it? Wouldn't it be easier to just diet? And I get that sentiment. Of course, it's very harmful to just diet. So there's that. It's like it's harming your life. But I think, too, there's this idea that you're saying of like this post-traumatic growth that you experience going through the fat phobia and having to be resilient to it creates a sort of superpower that then you can come out of it, like the phoenix rising from the ashes, or the bud shooting up, the grass shooting up after, some terrible fire or something like that. Like you're the one that's kind of got the special view that other people don't have. And so that is one way to navigate and survive in diet culture after you've gone through this sort of trauma.
And the other thing I would add to that is that we actually are seeing huge changes in our culture in the last 10 years because of people pushing back on fat phobia and pushing back on diet culture. Like the world is significantly different for me and for my children than it was for me 10 years ago, like significantly different. And in the book Shrill by Lindy West, and you've interviewed Lindy West on Food Psych, she writes about that. She writes about how at the beginning of her writing career, she actually had this very public battle with her boss, Dan Savage, in the blog of The Stranger, where she basically came out as fat, not that it like, and he wrote like a rebuttal and accused him of being fat phobic and what have you. And there was all this trolling that always happened to her. And so like she was navigating that, just vitriol and hatred on a daily basis. Not to say that she doesn't still get trolled, but in Shrill, she talks about in just 5 years, the idea has taken root that fat people are people and that there is something wrong with trolling them, with harassing them, with being awful to them, like that's actually a violation of someone's civil rights. Like that idea has taken root in our culture over the last like 5 to 7 to 10 years. And that did not exist when I was growing up. So culture is shifting because we are shifting it. So I don't think it's helpless.
Right, totally. That's such a great point. And I think it is, I mean, I think this also speaks to like how culture shifts in the most progressive circles first. You know, like I think that idea that fat rights are human rights and that trolling or shaming people for their body size is not okay. I think that's more evident and sort of prominent in the more woke spaces, if you will, you know, instead of like, I think that some folks who are really surrounded by it, maybe living in more conservative areas or who don't have access to that sort of like social justice vibe that's just in the community, it might be harder and it might be happening more slowly.
I think that's definitely the case. And I certainly know that like when I first was new to the fat acceptance, anti-diet culture communities, like my source of information and the thing that fortified me was all those blogs and social media posts. So although nobody in my immediate real life shared those views, reading those blog posts and those comments and following those people emboldened me and like helped that thing take root. And it felt like this, like being wrapped in support and community and carrying it around with me in my head. And then I think something that we can do now is when we don't have these people in our immediate real lives, like seek them out in Facebook groups, go join places, or not just Facebook groups, but any kind of like community, even if it's online, like seek that out so that you start carrying it around with you all the time.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And then eventually you do start creating it in your own life too. Like you said, you know, you're giving that sort of real life embodiment to these ideas for your daughters, and they're growing up with it in their real life. So like we're starting to be able to create these communities one person at a time even.
Right. Liberation is contagious. Like you get to be the change agent. You get to influence the people around you, which sometimes when there's pushback is enormously painful, but you can start creating those like widening bubbles of thought and those widening bubbles of space to be that. And so I created that for my daughters, and then they go out in the world and they create those ever widening bubbles too for their friends and the people they interact with. And eventually all our bubbles will like link up. And this will be the new air that we breathe.
Oh, yes. Such a great metaphor, creating this like dome over the top of the other terrible air we've been breathing this whole time. I'm curious, you know, you talk about being the culture makers and the change agents, and that is such a driving force in your work. That's one of your mottos is we are the culture makers. And you have this very unique practice as a feminist marketing consultant, which I feel like is so rare in this culture, and you're really leading the way in a lot of ways and sort of helping online entrepreneurs or just business owners and entrepreneurs in general make change and move their businesses in a more intersectional feminist direction. And I'm curious how that all came together, how your feminist analysis developed and where that fit in with your anti-diet culture awakening and how it came to morph into this marketing sort of space.
I mean, so my feminist awakening came probably when I was around 11 years old, when I as a brainy kid in the summer, my worst nightmare was like to have to go outside and play sports, and all I wanted to do was read. And like to the point that my mother would be like, please go outside and lock me outside. You know? And so what I would do is I would just take books with me and sit on the porch. And all she wanted me to do was get some fresh air, and all I wanted to do was read. So that was sort of where we landed. Anyways, I spent the entire summer walking to the library every single day. And what I ended up doing that summer, in addition to taking out the entire line of diaries from Anais Nin, I don't know what the librarian was thinking. I took out every single Ms. magazine in the library, like every single one, like years worth of Ms. magazines, and just like inhaled them and just felt like, oh my gosh, this helps me see something. So I was a child who was being sexually abused by a relative, and reading these Ms. magazines, I realized that this wasn't personal. between the two of us. This was a result of women and girls being devalued and exploited in our culture. And that actually helped me so much, because then I realized, like, this isn't about me being defective or shameful. This is a shameful thing that our culture does to girls and women. And it really helped me divest of like any personal shame I was carrying from that. And so that's like sort of where I learned feminism and what a powerful impact that had on me. And so I always was a feminist. Even when I'm 12 and 13 years old, passing out in the bathroom from not eating, I just didn't have a connection between those two things about how diet culture was anti-feminist. I didn't have a connection for that. And I didn't have a connection from that until, like I said, in my 30s. But I was always a feminist. When I went to university and studied political science, I didn't take any women's studies classes, but I wrote everything from a feminist perspective. Like that was my basic framework. That is my foundation. That is who I am. And like, sometimes people talk about like spiritual practices and I don't really get it, because like my spirituality is feminism. Like that is my moral framework and it's how I see the world. And something that I struggled with in my career in my 20s and 30s was it was really abundantly clear to me after I graduated university that like you couldn't have those beliefs in the workplace and get ahead. Like you had to play the game, and that game wasn't feminist. And I really was like in a place of being torn for a long time, because I felt like I had to like damp down who I was in order to like show up and be a career woman. And at the same time, when I was like discovering fat acceptance and fat positivity, and that diet culture was a thing that we didn't have to accept, was at the same time that my feminism started like reemerging. So it was always there, but I felt like I had to damp it down. And suddenly I was like, this is the way I see the world, and I need to integrate it into everything that I do. And eventually it all came together where I started seeing like the work that I did as being a problem to the feminist world I wanted to create. So I'm a marketing consultant. I help people market. And I feel that many of the practices we take for granted in marketing are actually deeply harmful and functions of rape culture and override consent. And I'm not just talking about like marketing using women's bodies. I'm actually talking about like the psychological tricks we use in marketing. And so what I've been trying to do over the last several years, and it works, is to like divest of those practices and do something else. So how do we market if we're not going to trick people? How do we market if we're not going to bait and switch? How do we market if we're not going to give something to someone for free in order to trigger a sense of obligation, which is, essentially like overriding consent and something that supports rape culture? So my thought that we are the culture makers comes back to like, we have enormous power. We don't have to accept the way things are. Culture isn't this thing that exists outside of us. It is actually us. And so if we don't let that unjust culture flow through us and use our tongues and just do what it wants to do, like then we can shift it. And so that is something like the more that we speak up about it, the more that we write blog posts about it, the more that we share stuff on social media, like we can reshape our culture. We can create new norms.
I love that too, because it really is democratic. It's available to everyone, right? It's not like you have to be someone with a platform or that you have to completely change your career, although some people do, and that's great, but like you don't have to do that. You don't have to shift your career into, decide to like quit your job and become a body acceptance coach or whatever in order to reshape the culture like you're talking about.
Right. It's every location we are in our culture is valuable. Like you don't actually have to go stand in another sphere to be valuable. And here's the thing. When we read professionally published material or consume media from big organizations or blockbuster Hollywood movies, there is a bit of disbelief or media literacy that we critique them with. So like when I read Vogue magazine, I am 100% aware that those images are not real, that this is airbrushed, that this is lighting. Like I 100% have that media literacy. But when I'm scanning Instagram and my friend's Instagram or my news feed, and things are coming up from people who have 400 people following them, or from my friends, or a coach I'm following, or an acupuncturist I'm following, I don't read them with the same level of disbelief. I don't think like this image has been manipulated, this copy is sales copy. Like I read them like they're my friends with a sense of trust. And so that's why I want to remind us that we are culture makers, and the images that we produce and the media that we produce on social media is really significant because the people around us are trusting us. And so we can take control. Like we actually have a huge amount of influence, maybe even more so than people with huge platforms or big brands, because people evaluate them critically in a way that they don't evaluate us critically. So what we put out there lands with more trust and in a way more authority. So if we do something different with our images, it has a big impact on the people around us. If we do something different with our messaging, it has a big impact. So if I follow a friend who is writing a lot of anti-diet culture messages, that's going to land on me way more significantly than a Weight Watchers commercial, because I trust and care about that person and I believe them. Whereas a Weight Watchers commercial, I think this is a brand trying to trick me.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's so important and sort of cuts both ways too, right? Like that, you have friends and family that you're following in your social media feeds and that you trust to a certain degree. And suddenly someone is talking about their Beachbody diet or their keto diet or their cleanse or their intermittent fasting or whatever it is, right? And like that can also have a really profound negative impact, more so than even the diet ads that you see. Although of course those have a negative impact too, and we should click, don't show me ads like this anymore, right? But the people, and I've even seen research on this that like specifically, I think it's like Facebook and Instagram, people are more negatively affected by images of bodies from their friends and family or the people that they know that they follow than they are from brands.
This is exactly what we're talking about. Yes.
Yeah.
You have so much power.
Like even those big brands that have supermodels posing for them and that are airbrushed beyond belief. I mean, that is negatively impacting us, but also we do kind of know, right? We have that sort of baseline media literacy. Whereas when your friend face tunes themselves or poses in a way to like shave off inches or, whatever, that has a much more negative impact because we also believe that that's real to a larger extent.
Right. And these are also the people who we measure ourselves against, right? Like this is sort of our human barometers of like what our world looks like. Heidi Klum is not a human barometer for me of like what my reality looks like, but the friends I follow on Facebook are. So this is, again, we are the culture makers. What we put out there matters and can harm, but also can create liberation. So we can decide what we want to do with that power. And it doesn't mean you need 100,000 people following you on YouTube for you to have an influence. Like your 800 friends and family, you have a significant influence on them.
I'm curious to dig in a little bit to your idea of the female lifestyle empowerment brand, because you talk a lot about how like people tend to default to that idea, and we can talk more about what it actually is, but people tend to default to the female lifestyle empowerment brand or FLEB in the absence of sort of an understanding of how they actually want to be positioning themselves or marketing themselves. And I see this even in friends' Instagrams and Facebooks and stuff like that, where it's, people are building a business or a practice as a coach or as a therapist or dietitian or whatever it is, and trying to be real and authentic, but also having some of these tropes creep in a way that can be harmful. So I think it would be really interesting to like unpack that and explore what the female lifestyle empowerment brand is and how we can like take some steps to divest ourselves of that.
Sure. So at the beginning of our conversation, we talked about this moment I had when I was about 12 years old, going on 13, when I realized like, I'm going to have to be a good girl, right? I'm going to have to be the perfect woman. How do I turn myself into like the right kind of woman? How do I stop being mouthy and noisy and too smart? And how do I stop being that and start being an appropriate woman who will be popular, who will be loved? That is basically the cultural version of the female lifestyle empowerment brand. We feel, most of us who've been socialized as girls and women, feel a certain pressure to be a particular thing in order to be loved, in order to be successful, in order to have careers, in order to be able to move around in the world, to be safe, to find a mate. Like we feel pressure to be a particular thing. Because again, the cultural message is just by being a woman, there's something wrong with us and we need to spend our lives fixing whatever that thing is, which is, again, just being a woman is what's wrong with us. So we feel that pressure. So there is this image in our heads, it's a cultural imprint of like, here's what the ideal perfect woman is. So that's been called like the beauty myth, that's been called the cult of true womanhood. Like across time, it's been called many different things. I call it the female lifestyle empowerment brand in the marketing sense. But that pressure to be a particular thing in order to get rights and resources and space in our culture, that pressure is, I think, our cultural default. I don't know any women who don't feel that, but I don't know every woman, so I'm totally willing to admit that this might not be the case for everybody. But that cultural narrative in a marketing frame, so like when you as a woman are trying to build a company or a career, that pressure is, what does a woman look like who's successful? If you close your eyes right now and think, like, what does a successful woman look like? Like, what pops into your head? Like, if you did that, Christy, what pops into your head?
It's like Marie Forleo,
Yeah.
like long, very long curly hair, like wavy curly hair, thick white woman, thin, conventionally attractive, symmetrical features, a lot of external trappings of wealth, like the large diamond rock and, big gold bracelets and jewelry and stuff.
Right. And the chic dress and the high heels.
Chic, yep. Yeah. And like a background probably that's like, a high-end kitchen or a high-end office or something like that.
Right. So, I mean, the first sort of prescription for what it takes to be a career successful woman is like, thou shalt be pretty. You shall be white. You shall be able-bodied. You shall be heterosexual, or at least appear to be so. You must be thin. Like, those are all, you must have all of those things. So you earn your space in a culture because you are the acceptable woman, and then you are also able to exercise power over other women and only other women. And you can build a career and some wealth for yourself and call that empowerment, but not power. So we have that image of like what success is. And it's not like an accident, right? Like the image that you have in your head is exactly the same as the image that I have in my head. And then what I do is measure myself against that image and like all the things that are wrong with me that I need to go fix in order to also have the things that Marie Forleo has, which is like wealth, influence, a successful business. In order to get those things, first I must be that other thing. And so what happens, because of that cultural default that you can then monetize, that's how many women go about building brands and businesses, is first they put out that image and they show that they're the whole package of like what a woman is supposed to be in order to then get the validity for their work. And I just want to flip that and just like show up with your work and your expertise and your brilliance and force the culture to create room for you.
I love that. Yeah, instead of feeling like you have to default to these signifiers of power and signifiers of influence. And you talk about too, like how a lot of these female lifestyle empowerment brand proponents are actually influenced by like men's rights activists, which is so insidious and terrifying, that like a lot of the sort of idea of social triggers that influences these marketers who are women marketing to women in this particular way actually comes from a very misogynistic place that they might not even be aware of themselves.
Right. I want to be really clear about that. In no way do I think that the people who are teaching us how to market, like the women who are teaching us how to market, are like trying to turn us into men's rights activists or even know that some of their tactics are coming from there. But like there is a lineage here of where these tactics come from, and that's part of it. So if we look at like the kinds of things that female lifestyle empowerment brands who teach us how to market and teach us how to build businesses, they teach us a particular online methodology that comes from Jeff Walker's Launch. And Jeff Walker is in, or I don't know if he still is in, but was in a marketing mastermind with a whole number of other people, including a fellow named Eben Pagan, who is his alter ego is David D'Angelo, the pickup artist. And so he learned how to like market his stuff by being a pickup artist, and then like took everything he learned in marketing about like how to profile people and how to psychologically trigger them and then turn that into a marketing company called Get Altitude that teaches people how to online market. So many of like our very basic marketing tactics that we use in launching and in content marketing and online marketing and building social proof actually like have a pretty nefarious history. But in no way am I saying that like a woman coach who's teaching those tactics understands that that's where they came from. That being said, they still have the same outcomes where we're like psychologically triggering people into high risk decisions. And most of the people I work with are like healers and coaches who want to facilitate women building power and making deliberate decisions about their lives. And so if we're using sales funnels that psychologically trigger those same people into making high risk subconscious decisions, like we're actually working against our work in the world.
Absolutely. And that's just so important, I think, for people to be aware of that, like, it isn't intentional. And for health and wellness professionals or anyone working in this sort of entrepreneurial space who's listening to this, if you've defaulted to any of those strategies, it's not that you're a bad person or that you're doing it intentionally. And I know for myself too, like I worked with you as a marketing coach because when I was reading about the female lifestyle empowerment brand and your writing on the subject, I was like, oh shit, where does that show up for me? How does that live in my work unintentionally? And was really helpful to just talk it through and have you look over my stuff and sort of feel like I had a good sense of where I was really coming from and what the intention of my work was and not have it be clouded by this other stuff. But, you know, even I had some of that stuff in there that I just had no idea because...
So did I. Air that we breathe.
Yeah, right. And I think too, a lot of us in the sort of coaching and healing spaces, like we go to school for coaching and healing. We don't actually get a lot of information about business and marketing, or if we do, it often is coming from that same kind of social triggersy place. Like I know a couple of, at least one like online coaching school for nutrition that I won't name, but I think a lot of people probably know what it is I'm talking about, has a lot of teaching about entrepreneurship and sort of how to build your coaching practice, but it really comes from that place of the female lifestyle empowerment brand, essentially. And so it's inheriting that whole lineage, and people, again, who are going to school there and like learning these skills and tools have no idea. They're just like, okay, cool. Now I know how to market my business and like fill my coaching practice. And who doesn't want that? Because we all are trying to make a living.
Right. And and that's the thing is like, I don't want us not to make livings. I don't want to make it harder for us. Like I want us to thrive. That is my feminist vision of the world, is like a world in which we all thrive and flourish instead of a world in which we are blocked, limited, and deprived of resources to which we are entitled as humans. So I want us to be successful. I'm not saying like, oh, you're a bad person because you're trying to market your business and you use these tactics. Like I absolutely have compassion. I did it too. And it's again, the default, just like we were talking about diet culture being the default. We don't even realize it until we realize it. And then we have to like seek out different tools and practices to equip ourselves with so we can navigate and flourish in our lives. And here's what I also know to be true. It's like when we do that, we actually do set ourselves up to flourish.
Yes. I would love to dig into that more because one of your pieces of writing that I think has been the most impactful for me personally has been this piece you wrote called The Wealthy Feminist, which just like blew my mind and completely helped me. You know, I was sort of at a point of like wanting to look at and reassess my relationship with money because my husband and I are trying to like work towards some goals we have and, you know, eventually be able to afford to start a family, which is like, you know, felt impossible at the time. And so I feel like looking at that and sort of thinking about this idea of flourishing and being able to support oneself, not as antithetical to the practice of social justice, but actually necessary for it, was just like mind-blowing.
So I'm so glad you say that because I got so much pushback about that article. I was called reprehensible, like in all kinds of things for writing that women and marginalized people should get resources and that there is nothing wrong with us. And in fact, like very, very important for us to build resources and power. Because here's what I think. I think the system is designed, just like diet culture is designed, to starve us of rights and resources, to starve us of wealth and opportunity. and to then hoard it and distribute it to a select group of people, what Audre Lorde calls the mythical norm, which is like basically white men. So that's what the system is designed to do. It is designed to deprive us. So by us refusing or not allowing ourselves to build wealth, we're actually letting the system win. And I'm not talking about build wealth like sally forth and become a billionaire and hoard resources. I'm talking about like building the resources that we need to flourish in our personal lives and invest in our communities. We all need to flourish. So it's really important that we go and get the resources to do that. So I don't think money is an end in itself. I feel like money is like an enabler. It's a tool. It is something we use to create the outcomes that we want. So we absolutely 100% need to build wealth and power as communities and as individuals. And doing that actually helps the system crumble. But we have to do it in like a systems change kind of way. So, I don't think we should build wealth by investing in a petroleum company, right? I think we should build wealth by figuring out how to invest, like figure out the next wind power thing and build a whole bunch of wealth and resources in a positive way that changes the system. So yes, like you, for example, doing this kind of work where you're doing systems change work, where you're helping us push back against diet culture and get free of it so that we can live powerful, flourishing lives. That is something like I want you to get resources so that you can pay people around you, so that you can support your community, so that you can always make sure your lights are on and your microphone turns on. Like, I want all of those things for you because we need them. We need more of your work in the world, and we need you to be happy, healthy, and flourishing so that you can do that work. I don't want my artists to starve. I don't want my system changers to starve, because then they're going to be so focused on like how they get their next meal that they can't do the amazing work that they're here to do. So we 100% need to get resources so we can do more of our amazing work and support each other in doing more of our amazing work, and have the money to invest in feminist candidates who will protect our rights, and have the money to buy a cable network station and change the programming. Like, we need those culture-making resources. And right now, in the frame that we live in, like, money is how we get those things.
Totally. Yeah. And it's like, you can be someone who has questions about capitalism or is opposed to it. That's totally understandable from the standpoint of like how capitalism has been used against us for these centuries that it has been. But also, like, I don't think it's going to crumble immediately anytime soon. And so we need to learn how to work within it if we're going to make large systemic changes, like what you're saying about, buying a cable network. Like, you use the example of Shonda Rhimes, of people who are making entertainment basically that actually reflects us to ourselves in a more real way. Or people who are, like my dream with when I make my millions, and I say when as like, the hope, right, of like starting a fund, like a foundation that gives grants to researchers for more health at every size and intuitive eating research, so that we can build the body of scientific evidence to push back against the healthist rhetoric of the diet industry and diet culture within the medical field. That is one thing that I'm like, really would love to do if I, when I make some money. And that's not going to happen. That's not possible when I'm just figuring out how to pay the bills and scraping by.
Yes. I mean, it consumes so much. Survival consumes a lot of mental and emotional resources. So, I mean, we need those resources to be devoted to like our creative undertakings and our business building and our community building. Like, that's what we need them for. I want us all to flourish. So I'm not suggesting we take away the tools. I'm suggesting we build new ones that create new outcomes.
And that has such an interesting parallel too with diet culture, because I talk a lot about how, diet culture is trauma. Diet culture creates this sense of deprivation that truly is traumatic to the body. And that can be from just dieting, just straight up restricting yourself, or an eating disorder, or it can be from the food insecurity, that food insecurity doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so people who are food insecure also feel oppressed by diet culture, but in addition, don't literally have the resources to be able to afford consistent food. And so have this real sense of deprivation and lack that persists even when, maybe there is some money for food and stuff like that. And it really has this lasting imprint on people's relationship with food and their bodies, whatever the cause of the deprivation. And we can't get out of that sense of just obsessing about food, having our entire waking thoughts taken up by thoughts of food in our bodies if we don't have enough. And if we don't have really more than enough, like an abundance where we're able to feel like, okay, food is coming, I know it's going to be here whenever I want it. And so now what do I truly want? And from that place, that is what frees us up to then think about, our careers and our families and our dreams and our big work in the world, like all of the other things that really have to take a back seat when that basic survival need is not met.
There is a total parallel. And I'm thinking too about the research about poverty and like working poor. And I'm thinking about like the times in my life when I was absolutely like strapped for cash, and not broke, like poor. And the amount of brilliance, creativity, and ingenuity it takes to make it through a month when you don't have enough income to meet your needs is unbelievable. Like we are brilliant, brilliant humans, and poor people and broke people are especially creative and ingenious. But like, I'm just thinking about how chaotic, and there's research about this, like how chaotic the smallest life events become when you don't have enough resources to handle them. And all of your genius and creativity comes to like hacking together these like brilliant little solves that you have that help you make it to the next paycheck. Right. So it makes your life chaotic, not having enough income. And that's like by design, right? Like the system wants to keep us focused on surviving so that we actually can't create a new world. But those of us who are deprived of resources, there's this sort of cultural narrative that says we're not smart, we're not hardworking, we're not brilliant. I think those of us who are like in states of lack are literally the most creative and ingenious because we have to be in order to survive. And so imagine now, if we have enough resources and we can take that creativity and ingeniousness, what can we create? Like anything is possible.
I know, it's incredible. And it really does have such parallels too with diet culture. Like I was thinking as you were talking about how ingenious the body is too at getting its needs met when it's deprived. Like binge eating, diet culture demonizes binge eating, and people always come in saying like, I want to stop binging. That's the first thing. But it's like, let's talk about how binging is your body's way of coping with this lack that has been created in your life, and how overcoming that lack is really going to be the key to reducing the binging. But right now, the binging is a survival tool. The binging is keeping you alive. And that's so creative of your body, and that's so ingenious of your body to be able to drive you to that and figure out ways to get its needs met, even when you're not doing it consistently otherwise.
Well, something I'm thinking about is like conversations I've had with Dr. Linda Bacon, who wrote Health at Every Size, which has been like so foundational in my life, like life altering. Linda has talked about that too, about how ingenious we are. Like we get so down on ourselves when we have like vices or addictions and we think there's something wrong and defective. But what we're actually doing is coming up with coping techniques to cope with the oppression and like abuse and trauma that's been heaped on us by an unjust culture. And so like there's a way in which being addicted or having vices is ingenious, right? Like you are trying to solve a problem that is so much larger than you. And like, instead of being so upset at yourself for having this horrible thing that's hurting you, you have to like kind of thank your addiction for taking care of you, and then find ways and tools to equip yourself with that do less harm to you, that still help you cope with those wider circumstances, that unjust culture. But like, there's nothing wrong with you for having these challenges. That is you trying to survive, and like your body and your mind and your spirit are ingenious because you're in an intolerable situation and you are surviving it.
I know we don't give ourselves enough credit. And I think even the system conditions us not to give ourselves enough credit for those coping mechanisms, because it's like, oh, these poor people they're drinking their life away or whatever. It's the sort of stigma that gets heaped on people for using those coping mechanisms really misses the point that they're in an intolerable situation to begin with. And that this coping mechanism actually is the best they can do at this point because of the limited circumstances that they find themselves in.
Right. I'm just thinking about, I've mentioned it a couple of times in this interview, but like the Health at Every Size movement has been just so pivotal in my life And like that amount of compassion of like, there's nothing wrong with you. There's something deeply wrong with our society. And you're doing your best. And here are some other tools that you can fold in that can really like help you flourish and be like a whole human instead of someone who's like trying to take up less space. Like this has been like, I just can't stress enough how this has changed my life. And even when we were talking about like carrying around your community, even if it's a community of bloggers that you read, and creating these bubbles, and that eventually our bubbles will link up, like that also comes from, you know, Dr. Bacon. Like these ideas can keep us safe. And so if you don't have those people in your life, like books can be your best friend, blogs can be your best friend, social media accounts can be sustenance in the absence of actual physical community in your life.
Absolutely. It's so important. And I think like eventually maybe you will find people in real life too, but like for now and for the whatever time it takes until we create those bubbles that link up in the wider culture, I think it is so important like that you literally have that in your back pocket. You know, you have that in your phone, you have that community with you pretty much at all times. You know, if you have a cell phone that you carry around with you that's linked up to the internet, you've got access to that community. And that's part of why I do this podcast too, is just to create a safe space away from diet culture and a space to sort of push back. As I've said before, like, you know, the bubble has its own pressure, right? It has its own sort of counter pressure against the outside world, and it helps keep you inside and safe from the pressures pushing in on you from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why as a kid, I wanted to sit on the porch and read. And I went to the library and took out all those Ms. magazines. And those things changed my life. So eventually, you're right, we will find our community. And sometimes we will create it where it didn't exist before by influencing the people around us. We are the culture makers. We don't have to accept the situations that we're in. We have the power to influence the way other people think and to start shifting people's ideas. We do have that power.
Absolutely. And I mean, I want to make sure we have some time to talk about your newest venture in this regard, because I think it brings together a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of culture making and money with SheEO. So can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how it sort of is working to shift the culture in this way?
Sure. So, I mean, I've been a feminist marketing consultant and had my own business for a long time, but recently I accepted an amazing position with an amazing organization called SheEO. So what SheEO is a global organization that invests in women-led businesses that are doing system change work. And I'm now the head of marketing and communications for SheEO. And like what I'm thrilled about is, you know, when I talked about like we want to have the resources to support people who are creating new things, like we want to invest in solar power rather than petroleum, like that systems change work. So what SheEO does is raise money from a group of women who put money in and create a pool that then lends that money out at 0% interest loans across 5 years to women-led businesses that are doing that kind of systems change work. And so I'll give you an example. In the US, there's this company called BioSelection that's founded by two very young women. They're in their early 20s, mid-20s, and they have invented a chemical process that recycles the materials that otherwise go in the landfill. So a lot of what we recycle actually never gets recycled because it's too dirty. So the stuff that is too dirty to be recycled, they have a chemical process that will repurpose that down into compounds. And then those compounds they can sell to organizations that make industrial products. And then those organizations who buy those compounds no longer have to buy them from like big petroleum.
Oh, wow.
So now we're like divesting of oil and saving things out of the landfill. Like that's systems change work. And so SheEO as an organization selected BioSelection for funding and also support, like mentoring, coaching, being surrounded by a network who can help you get introductions that you need to get, like, and really is cultivating that business. And it does that in the United States, it does it in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and then other countries, once they sort of reach a critical mass of self-organizing, can bring that to their country as well, can bring the SheEO model to their country. So, I mean, I'm so passionate about it. It's like all the things I care about. It's feminist, it's women's entrepreneurship, it's systems change work. And it's like personally super thrilling to be involved in that kind of an organization. So that's my newest venture, taking that position. And it's just a dream come true.
That's so exciting. It really is like bringing together all these different elements of changing the culture at the systemic level, and then also like helping to support actual female entrepreneurs to help them rise and pay their bills and have the resources to flourish so that they can then do that thing at a larger scale, right? And like make more impact in the world.
Right. And then there's that money piece that you and I were talking about too. The reason SheEO can do that is because almost 2,000 women came together and put money into that pool. So they came up with the money to create that pool of money that gets lent to women-led businesses. And then those women-led businesses grow, like their revenue increases on an average of 300%. They add an average of like 3 jobs per year, each of them, to their companies. And so like what that does is create more material wealth in our community and more brilliant skilled people and more jobs and more great outcomes. But it also started because some women had some resources that they were able to share. And if they weren't making rent, they wouldn't have had those resources to share. So again, like it's really critical that we build resources, because when we do that, we grow them. And so it's not about building a personal empire. It's about making sure you have an abundant, thriving livelihood, and our community has all the resources that we need to thrive and change the game.
Yes. And I think it was in one of your marketing workshops or somewhere, one of your pieces of work that I stumbled on that was like, you talked about research showing that when women have extra money, they are more likely to invest it in their communities or in organizations that they care about than just saving it or whatever, like, you know, using it for personal use. They're more likely to actually share it with their communities.
Right. So that comes out of like international development bodies of research and work that shows that when women have income in their hands, they invest in their children, they invest in their communities, they invest in their home. Like they do everything to make sure that everyone around them is safe. They pay their kids' school fees, they put a new roof on the house. Like that's what women do with income. They spend like 90% of their income on the people and around them, like their immediate families and their communities, where the research shows that like when men have incomes, they spend about 30% on like caregiving and community. And I don't know what happens to the rest of it.
Yeah.
But like, so when you put income in the hands of women, it actually takes care of entire communities.
God, that's incredible. And yet women have historically been the least able to access money, right, and resources. Well, women and trans and gender nonconforming people, anyone who's not that mythic norm, basically, that Audre Lorde talks about.
Right. And so when we have that in our heads, as like for me as a woman and a fat woman in our culture, when I have it in my head that money is a bad thing, that I am selfish and greedy for having money or having resources, like that's a really convenient thing for the system, right? Like it's meant to keep me poor. And it's only like in our North American context, like women couldn't have credit cards until like the late 70s.
Yeah.
Right? Like
ridiculous.
It's a recent development that we've been able to earn incomes and control resources on our own. So like that cultural programming that we are not supposed to amass wealth or resources or have independent incomes, like that is something that we have to divest of in order to create a new world.
Yeah, I think healing our relationship with money is, you know, maybe the next step, or I don't know, for a lot of us, I think we go through like the healing our relationship with food piece maybe first, just because that's such a survival, you know, immediate thing. But then, I mean, for me, that's been one of my more recent sort of self-development pieces is like healing my relationship with money, or just questioning and understanding my relationship with money and divesting of some of these beliefs that I had inherited, or that had, you know, it's funny because like with my family, I feel like I was actually taught some pretty good skills and habits around money and never made to feel like, oh, you're a girl, so you can't do this. But then just the pressure from the larger culture and the stuff that I had absorbed sort of outweighed a lot of that for a long time, you know, and especially these beliefs about like the starving artist. I think I really bought into that and was really just like, it's got to be a struggle. It's, you know, this is me doing my my artwork and my, social justice work, like nobody makes money doing this and that's just what I've chosen. That's just bullshit. And I feel like your work has really helped open my eyes to that. And I think a lot of people are talking about that now too. Like Ashley Nicole Black has this great podcast where she's spoken about that with women entrepreneurs and financial coaches and stuff, which I've learned a lot from. And I just feel like it's the next level maybe of not empowerment, but actual power.
Actual power.
Yeah.
So, I can just share something from my personal life. Money is safety. And when a culture trains us that we can't have that thing, it's trying to keep us exploitable. It's trying to keep preying on us. And here's what I know from my own personal life. I, for 10 years, had 2 children and did not get child support for 10 years for those 2 children. I was struggling, like really struggling to provide. And I didn't have enough money to get a lawyer and made just enough money not to qualify for legal aid. And so for in that limbo for 10 years, I just couldn't advance my situation legally speaking. And the person my ex, like exploited that situation and would threaten me. And, every time I made noises about trying to get child support would like, okay, so let's go to court and, I'll get custody of the kids. And I would be so terrified of losing my children that I would just fold because I didn't have any way to advocate for myself in court, or so I thought. And then 2 years ago, my situation significantly changed. My consulting practice was doing really well. I was making a lot of money for the first time in my life. And when this situation blew up again, this time I had money to go hire a lawyer, and I hired a shark of a lawyer, right? Like I spent all the money. I'm still on a payment plan, but I finally had resources to go get a lawyer, and we went to court. And now I get child support, of course, at the moment that I don't need child support. But more importantly, I have a legal document that says what the rights are, that the children are not going to be taken away from me, that I have the right to make decisions about where they live and what schools they go to, and that nobody can like infringe on that. And so that has given me such a sense of security, and I can make confident decisions and make long-term plans for my children's well-being because I finally had the resources to advocate for myself and keep myself and my daughters safe.
That's amazing.
This is important, right? Like not having those resources kept me under someone's thumb for 10 years. 10 years after I had left him.
God, yes. I know. It's incredible to think how much money helps in those kinds of situations, and even like helping people leave a situation that's domestically abusive or financially abusive or whatever it is too. If you don't have the resources to get out, like to get a divorce or to live on your own, then you're stuck there. And so yeah, having the resources for a lawyer, like that's so, it seems so like mundane or something, but it actually is life-changing.
It's life-changing. And at the same time that was going on, my mother-in-law had, from my second marriage, had Alzheimer's and had gone blind. And like, we were actually able to leave the country and go be with her and pay for medical bills and, pay for support, because we actually had resources. So like being able to take care of each other, like this is not about like Louis Vuitton bags, right? Like this is about making sure my family survives and thrives. And like, let's be real about what that takes at this moment in time in this society. It takes money.
And a lot of it, like
right.
Especially for those sort of unforeseen circumstances, like an elder getting sick and not having the care they need. And like, God knows, home health aides and stuff like that cost a fortune, and they should, they need to get paid, but like
Absolutely.
It all just costs money, and we have to have those resources. Otherwise, then what, it's like, thank God you had that, right? Thank God you were able to offer that support to your mother-in-law, to your kids, like to help save them from being used as leverage against you, really.
Yeah.
And that you could continue doing your culture making work in the midst of all that too. Because if you had just had to lose everything or put everything into those efforts and like shut down your business, then the world would be a worse place.
Oh, thank you. But I just want to point out too that it's like by not having resources, we can be preyed upon, right? We can be exploited, we can be abused. And it impacts those of us who are marginalized like even more acutely. So my mother-in-law, who would have been hurt if I didn't have resources? My mother-in-law, who's in her 80s, my children who were, at the time 12 and 10 years old. So young girls and an elderly woman. So like it is so important that I, as a woman, get resources because, again, as the research shows, what do? I will take care of my family, I will keep us safe, and I will invest in my community. That is what we'll do.
Oh, I love it. I think everyone should read your piece on the wealthy feminist. And we're going to include it in the show notes for this episode and all of your work, because I think it really is this idea of creating the resources to create cultural change is sort of infused in everything you do. So thank you so much for leading the way on that, for bringing that to light in my life and in the lives of so many other people. Because I think I know that I am able to achieve some like very modest life goals that I never thought I would have been able to achieve before.
Well, and I mean, I thank you for saying that I'm leading the way, but I think that I am like the product of a lineage, right? And standing on the shoulders of giants and all the feminist and intersectional and civil rights leaders who came before me, and all the fat positivity bloggers and fat acceptance bloggers and health at every size practitioners, like all of you birthed me.
I love it. I think it's a really mutual sort of thing, right? That when we grow and flourish in some area, that other people are allowed to grow and flourish in their particular area of expertise or of genius, really.
Right. We're an ecosystem, right? And so we need each other in order for the whole thing to flourish.
Yes. Oh, it's so beautiful. Well, tell us where people can find you and learn more about your work.
So you can find me at kellydiels.com, and I teach once a month a 3-hour online workshop about feminist marketing. And I have a lot of work about the female lifestyle empowerment brand and about like what it takes to be a culture maker and how we are all culture makers. So I appreciate it. I have a weekly newsletter, and thanks everyone for listening to this conversation.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and your wisdom. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Christy.
So that is our show. Thanks again so much to Kelly Diels for joining us on this episode, and thanks to you for listening. If you're looking for some practical tips to help get started on the anti-diet path for yourself, you can grab my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. Just go to christyharrison.com/strategies to get it. That's christyharrison.com/strategies. If you've gotten something out of this podcast, please help us reach more people who need to hear the anti-diet message, because everybody does in diet culture, by sharing this episode on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. Also, be sure you're subscribed to the podcast yourself, and you can do that by going to christyharrison.com/subscribe. That's christyharrison.com/subscribe. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we discussed, plus a full transcript, go to christyharrison.com/193. That's christyharrison.com/193. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. This episode was brought to you by my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. If you're ready to make peace with food, break free from diet culture, and reclaim the life it stole from you, learn more and sign up at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. A big thanks, as always, to our editor and engineer, Mike Lalonde, and to my community and content associate, Vinci Chue, as well as my administrative assistant, Julianne Watasek, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show every week. It is a lot. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Meredith Noble, and our theme song was written and performed by Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.